Hello, everybody. This is Al. I'm here with Lainey Brown.
Hello.
Hi, Lainey. And Chris Martin and Zach Gardner. Zach, can you do your camera match? There they are. Look at those guys. It's getting to be the season where Zach puts on his winter cap. What's it say on the front? Something about the Eagles? Adidas. You're not supposed to do product placement in ModPo. Okay, sorry. Normally he's not on the air. Now we're back to Lainey and me. Lainey and I and those guys are here in Philadelphia. And actually, Lily is on the third floor of this very building, the Kelly Writer's house. I'm going to call up to her, see if she can hear me. Lily, can you hear me on the third floor? Apparently not. She's refusing to unmute. She doesn't want to play this game. Hi, Lil. Hey, Gabby. How are you?
Hello.
Is it getting chilly in Chicago?
Yes, and it's getting chilly in my house.
What do you not pay for heat? Can we get into that story? What is the story about this?
There's really no story. It's just that I get stubborn about how much heat costs in Chicago, so I keep it low and then I wrap myself in blankets.
I've got a solution for you. Flagstaff, San Antonio, Birmingham,
Oh my gosh, well, that's true.
Miami, Havana. I'm telling you, they're not wearing blankets on Webcast in Havana this morning.
It's so perfect here for 3 months,
Yeah.
and then it's awful.
Yes, that's Chicago. Kate Colby, hello. Kenar, hello. And Amber Rose seems to be a potted plant today. Does anybody know what that reference is?
I do.
Lainey?
Potted plant parenting theory?
No.
Oh, come on.
Political reference. The Iran-Contra hearings.
Okay. Earlier. An earlier
You-
reference.
I'm being dated here. Anybody know what the reference is? Lily's probably a student of these sort of things. Mediated history? No? Lily still refuses to unmute because Al's being an ass. Potted plant. The attorney for Oliver North, who sat there during the hearings, was chastised by, I'm probably getting this not quite right, but chastised by the Congress people who were running the hearings. And they didn't want him to talk, and Oliver North was not a great client because he talked too much. And this guy, I can't remember, his first name was Brendan or something, they chastised the lawyer, and he said, "What am I, a potted plant?" And that became, for about 5 minutes, really interesting. Allie, good morning. Hello. Okay, we're going to start with a round. So it's week 8, and the language poets and language-y people, language-ish people, and others. And I thought we'd start with a round of favorite pieces from either the main syllabus or ModPo Plus. So while you guys are thinking about what your favorite piece would be, I'm going to ask some people to look at the social media. Lily, is Twitter your thing, your jam this morning? Okay. That's Lily. Facebook group. Amber Rose, would you're potted plant again. There you are. Hey, is Facebook okay for you today? Okay.
Oh, sorry, I was muted, but yes,
That's all right.
fine.
Yep. Facebook people, go to the Facebook group. And if you're a Facebook person, many of us aren't, but if you are, you just go in and you search for ModPo, and you'll find the group. If you haven't joined it, you can join it. And Amber Rose will post something there. Okay. The forum thread, Dave Poplar, would you do that? It's not hard to find. And YouTube chat, Kenar and Allie, will you do that? Okay, great. So those of you who are watching, you should call us at 610-616-3208 or Skype at ModPo Pen. Chris Martin is on the other end of the line. He loves talking with people, so give him a call, 610-616-3208. And use some of these fora. Is fora still the plural acceptable, Lainey? Fora? No, forums.
Forms?
Use the various social media forums, Twitter, Facebook, forum, the forum thread inside ModPo or YouTube chat to communicate with us, pose questions. All right, now let's go around. We're going to start with Allie, with Kenar on deck. Favorite piece? It doesn't have to be all-time favorite. It can be what is great right at this moment in week 8.
I guess chronic meanings.
Chronic meanings. Quickly, why?
It's hard to like think of a poem off the top of my head that enacts loss and grief and the feeling of incompleteness the way that as effectively and like disarmingly as this one does.
I'm going to ask you a lightning round question, and we're going to go to Kanar with the favorite. A lightning round question. Why ever would an artist pondering loss and grief and disruption write in a grievous, loss-ish, and disruptive way? Why do that? Why not write in a consolation sort of way?
Because in a way, replicating the real experience is the closest way that you could honor that experience, right? And express your grief and share it.
So weirdly and unconventionally or counterintuitively, it's more realistic. It's closer to realism. Thank you, Allie. Kanar, favorite?
I'm not being a copycat. I was also thinking about chronic meanings because, well, for one thing, I hadn't actually heard Bob Perlman read it before, and I thought that reading was quite interesting. You can kind of, I don't know, I feel like you really hear sort of the labor of initiation at the beginning of each of those 5-word sentences, and it's just kind of incredible to hear, and to hear kind of the abrupt ending of each line, and then the kind of effort to begin again. So
there are several poems this week, My Life and Chronic Meanings among them, that are imitatable. I don't mean that in the bad sense. There have been people in the ModPo forums, maybe later I'll quote some lines from C.J. Prince, who is another Rookie of the Year in ModPo, who has written a prose poem based on Lynn's My Life. And I think it works really well to try one of those things as a constraint. Thank you, Kanar. I didn't put anybody on deck, but let's turn to Lily, followed by Dave.
I've been checking out ModPo Plus some this week, which I haven't spent a ton of time with, like historically, and really digging Elliptical by Harriet Moen, because I'm just feeling so grated by these, by news stories with vague and weirdly defined us's and them's, and this poem really, I think, helps to, how to read those in context and think about them.
It's quite brilliant. Lily, do you have the text nearby? Would you read just a few, just anywhere, a few of the lines?
They just can't seem to, they should try harder to, they ought to be more, we all wish they weren't so, they never, they always, sometimes they, once in a while they, however, it's obvious that their overall tendency has been, the consequences of which have been, they don't appear to understand that, if only they would make an effort to.
Thank you, Lily. So let's just, before we turn to Dave, let's promulgate, all of us, some synonyms for generalization. So what's heinous here is the ease with which the language, idiomatic and colloquial language, is full of giant unfair generalizations. What's a synonym for generalizations?
Stereotype.
Stereotype is one. Anybody else?
Like prejudice or
prejudice,
judgment.
prejudgment, prejudice. Profiling.
Like assertion.
Well, assertion. Yeah. So when you use stereotype, you get closer to what seems to be the thing in that poem, but it's not explicit because it engages in these quoting these giant generalizations. Yeah. Highly recommend that to everyone. Thank you. Dave, followed by Kate.
Yeah, I don't mean to just be a copycat, but I just like Chronic Meetings a lot, and I want to point out something very specific that I like about it, and that is the second line in Chronic Meetings is 5 words can say only, and I think that's great in the way that it gives us a roadmap to what the whole poem is doing and what it is, and it makes it even more accessible, because so many of these poems in this week feel kind of impenetrable, and they take a lot of work to understand. But I just like the simple fact that this poem gives us a heads up on what it's doing, and it allows us to engage with it, which is funny because part of it is feeling disengaged, but it allows us to engage with the concept right from the start.
You've raised a great issue about the week 8 poems, Dave, generally, which is that they are opaque but transparent at the same time. Transparent as to process, opaque as to content. And boy, oh boy, do I like that. I mean, that is like a great strategy for human communication, I think. Let's stop saying the same thing that we've always said to try to create a newness, but at the same time, let's be explicit about the process we're using, the constraint that we're under. Thank you, Dave. Kate, followed by Gabby.
Well, Susan Howe is my jam, how she, digs straight down into a subject and will not turn back or relent or widen the hole until she's found what she's looking for, whatever that may be. But I wanted to bring up Charles Bernstein's poem because we were talking before we went live a few minutes ago how arbitrary some of the classifications of these poets and poems are. And I was struck by the Ashberian sensibilities of this poem, especially in the end with the kind of Mobiusian spatial relations. And it reminded me so much, those last lines of some trees and we meet as far from the world. What is it? We meet as far from the world this morning.
Arranging by chance to meet as far from the world as agreeing with it.
Right. And here, this ends kind of in Zeno's paradox with like the divisibility of space, but I can't quite resolve it into to points and lines and points in space or what exactly he is getting at.
That's a really important point. And Charles, and there's a chance that Charles is watching this either live or a recording. I was just in touch with him about ModPo. Charles, if you're listening, after the early poetry, you are incredibly in the not shadow, but in the mode of Ashbery. He really has become an Ashberian poet. And nothing wrong with that. I don't know if that de-radicalizes him more than he would like, but whatever. He can defend himself. Come here. Come to Philly, Charles. Anyway, great observation. Thank you, Kate. Let's go to Amber Rose, followed by Gabby.
This is one of my absolute favorite weeks, and there are so many poems that I love, but I definitely have my eye on Any Lit by Harriet Mullen. This poem is like doing so many things at once. It's a really fun poem to me. She's playing, using this construct of you and me, but also sonically the construct of U sounds and U sounds and M sounds.
E, yeah.
And continues to like set up this binary. And each time it's like repeating this distance between the you and the me. But because the words continue to switch out, you are Eureka beyond my Mai Tai. You are Yuletide beyond my Minesweeper. As much as the distance is reified, it's also undermined by how many words are kind of just jumbled up, things that seem to have relation and then suddenly don't seem to have relation. And so there's like this constant play with order and boundary between you and me. And I love this poem so much.
I'm really glad that we're recording this because I'm going to ask McKenna, who's our video editor, to clip that out as just a wonderful, wonderful brief overview summary of that poem, Amber Rose Johnson. Thank you. Would you also, since you have the floor, say something on behalf of people going to the emerging Erica Hunt part of ModPo Plus Week 8? The reason I say emerging is we have a few videos left to do. We've got the basics of some great material there that we have to complete. You want to say a word or two about why people should think about Erica Hunt?
Yes. Oh, my mic is still on. Okay. Yes. Come on in to the Church of Erica Hunt. I am a firm believer and advocator. The first poem that's in ModPo Plus is Reader, We Were Meant to Meet. And that, I feel like, is the most beautiful Ars Poetica, just like what poetry should be. It's one of those beyond meta. It's just like, this is a statement on what poetry should do and be and make possible. And it's so plain too. Like Erica Hunt can speak, I mean, obviously can do really complex things with her writing, but Reader, We Are Meant to Meet is like incredibly complex ideas, but it's said so simply and so plainly that it really welcomes absolutely any reader in. But what she does, how she thinks about language within the poem, like if not for the comma, this kind of really close attention to the smallest parts of our language, the my's, the you's, the commas, the punctuation. She gets all up in the nitty gritty there. So that's my love.
Reader We Were Meant to Meet is almost everything that the ModPo ideas aspire to be in a poem. It's one of those 3 or 4 poems in ModPo that we call anthemic. If you read that poem and you really think about it, you pretty much got the ideas, all the ideas that many of the ideas we're trying to convey. The chief of them, Lainey, is one that you can find in the work of Linhoginian and others of this movement, language poetry movement, which is that meaning is co-created, that the object status of the reader can be a subject status, that subject positions include those who are invited to make meaning. And in the case of Erica's poem, as Amber Rose Johnson just pointed out, that is the topic of the poem, right? Because if you don't read me, reader, if you don't hear me, then I'm less able to do what I need to do. And that becomes a politics, which we won't have time right this moment to get into, but sometime in the next hour, we should talk about the not just ethical, but political implications of a collaborative poetics. The language poets of that generation, the people we've been talking about, are all of the same generation. They came of age philosophically, intellectually, collegiately in the 60s or late 60s, and then, so they had all the countercultural ideas, anti-authoritarian ideas, civil rights movements ideas, and anti-war ideas, and they carried forward into a new analysis of how language works. That's sort of so if you say 60s radicalism plus leftist semiotics equals language poetry early, that's got a politics to it. Now, we've gone a long way past that into a new generation of poets, but at that moment, that felt really utopian. Anyway, Lainey, I'm looking at you just but nattering on, but feel free to pick a poem or to say anything.
Yeah, I wanted to shout out to Harriet Mullen's Urban Tumbleweed, even though that we've already had a lot of Harriet speaking on Harriet's work, but I love that so much, and I'm thinking about where the poets are in physical space and the world around them, and their relation to each other, as you just mentioned, seems really important in week 8. And another poet in ModPo Plus, who I also think of this aspect of space is very different and important, is May Bursenberg. And we have her poem Concordance, and we have a long landscape-like line that has a very different energy and feel. I mean, all these poets, they all have a unique energy and feel. But just thinking about Erica, since Erica Hunt, Ambrose is speaking about Erica, I was thinking about how when you also are in the room when Erica's performing, there's a whole nother dimension to the work that then you can take back to the page. So I really wanted to invite everybody to watch the videos of Erica and and listen to Erica. And the same thing is true for all these poets. And for May really weaves a spell with her voice and her presence that's uniquely her.
Yeah.
But it also informs the work so that then when you go back to the page, you hear the voice of the poet.
Wonderful recommendations. You weave them all together. Good morning, Jason. What we're going to do is we're going to look into the social media venues, fora, and see what's happening there, see if there's some good questions. I'm going to remind everybody that if you call, we'll actually hear your voice, 610-616-3208, 610-616-3208. I'm also going to ask a question that was posed by Paige Paulsine of Los Angeles to the group. And then Lainey wants to have us contemplate something that Linhoginian finds fundamental and structural. And it's a really another generative question. So I'm looking forward to that. So let's go to Lily for Twitter. What's happening other than everybody saying hi?
Looks like our star tweeters this morning are Anthony Risser and Dennis Aguinaldo. And Anthony says, greetings from Chicago. Happy to have Anthony with us. And Dennis said something so beautiful about chronic meanings that I'll read if that's okay.
Yes.
He said, chronic meanings is anticipatory grief. It's what draws me to it. It's like rehearsal, and you can't pull it off. That's the only way to even approximate pulling it off.
Nice. Thank you, Anthony. That was great. Anthony Risser, long time ModPoer. Facebook, Amber Rose, anything happening there? Oh, your camera is off. Well, let's go to Dave, the discussion thread. Anything happening there?
Yeah, two comments. One from Apollonia Vakova, who lets us know that this is the first year that she made it all the way through to the language poets, and she's having a perfectly peachy time with them. And she actually hasn't gotten the chance to read a whole lot of the other poets because she opened Heginian's My Life and then immediately went out, got the entire book, and then read it through the night. So she's been obsessed with that. Also, Nicholas Stern offers a question. He asks, does language poetry necessarily entail constraints?
Nice. Appy, it's great. Good to see you this morning. Appy came to my office hours, really up on things. Fantastic. I want to go to Facebook, then YouTube, and then back to Gabby, who is a potted plant. Are there any potted plants in your house? I sort of see one in the back. Why don't you just take that
There are
plant?
so many potted plants in this
Okay.
house. That is Jarill's like passion.
I have been told by my daughter, who has a cat, that potted plants and cats don't get along. Is that what happens?
Oh, cats love them.
Oh, they
the
love
plants
it.
don't. But the cats
you
love them.
don't. Okay. Well, having been skipped, maybe you should get a potted plant and put it in front of your Zoom camera, and we can just talk to you like plant-like. No, sorry. I apologize. We skipped you. I'm going to come back to you. Dave, you did the forum thread. Thank you. Amber Rose, Facebook, anything?
Not much going on a Facebook. Just a hello from Susan and Jason. I'm sorry that I missed you, but glad that you found the link.
Great. And Kanar and Allie, YouTube chat. Kanar?
Yeah, maybe I'll mention, so there are a few kind of shout outs going on and kind of upcoming things. So Margaret Stevens mentions that a follow-up thread will be posted for the webcast. So look out for that.
Good.
And then we have just kind of a pointing toward Erica Hunt's 2-week slow po course from Sanjeev, just encouraging people to look that up. And then finally, so it sounds like the Global Studies group will be focusing on concordance, the Meme Brisingberg work this, let's see here,
This week. Yeah, this week. Yeah, exactly. If you go to week 8, no, ModPo Plus. You go to the ModPo Plus forum, you'll see the Global Studies Group, GSG. They've been talking about concordance for the last couple of days. They pick a poem each week, and you should definitely go. It's the liveliest conversation currently going on in the forums. And what was the other thing that you said that's being done? Oh, a follow-up to the webcast. Really appreciate those threads. Allie, anything else? Did Kanar take all the stuff?
No, there's always a lot going on. I mean, speaking of a follow-up to the webcast, Margaret Stevens also said, I have to replay these webcasts the way I reread the poems to keep reflecting and absorbing.
Oh.
Which is a very lovely thing to hear. I feel that way too myself sometimes. And then we have a really interesting conversation happening. Hannah Linden kind of posed the question, can we even trust ourselves if we are languaged? Which is such a huge question. So I'm just gonna leave that out there.
That's pretty good. I wonder if Gabby will weave an answer to Hannah Linden in their response in a minute. Listen, I also wanted to shout out to Margaret. At the end of this webcast, I'm going to read Margaret's open love letter to the ModPo TAs. Some of you have seen it, but it's worth sharing. So, Gabby, and then I'm just going to remind everybody, we're lonely here. We want you to call 610-616-3208. Gabby, favorite poem, and then Jason, we're just doing a quick comment on a favorite poem. Maybe you can join in on that. This favorite poem this week. Gabby?
Okay. Because I was skipped, I'm doing 2 very brief ones. One, in the main syllabus, My Life by Linhoginian is, for me, the kind of like great work of our syllabus, and also honestly, I think it's one of the top 5 great language poetry works. It's just a really good example of the sort of like Ron Sillimanian new sentence thing. And it's so smart about childhood. It's really quite a good thing. It's compulsively readable too. And then I want to shout out a ModPo Plus poem, which is, I want to shout out Ray Armantrout's Overhearing, which is just a great poem. There's something about, I feel like Ray Armantrout does the weird mix of tenderness and anxiety that comes with domesticity very well. And that poem is a good encapsulation of it. But for me, this is the week, like these people are the people who made me a poet. So it's a week that I have both many tender attachments to and many sort of like resentful bugbears. So
that was really well put. And I have a feeling that people listening or watching this will get even more excited than they already are hearing you say these things, because it's very personal, our relationship to these poets and their work. And those of us who spend a lot of time at the Writers' House have met them in person or heard them read, and it's, we know them. They're like old friends. Jason, quick favorite poem?
Unmuting myself. I think it would actually be Charles Bernstein's As If the Trees by Their Very Roots Had Hold of Us.
Which is in ModPo Plus.
And then from the main syllabus, the combination of the 2 Harriet Mullen poems, for sure.
Yes.
Like read against each other.
Yes, which we talked about just before you signed on.
Okay.
I want to read a post from Paige Polsine, and ask a bunch of people to respond. I don't know how many, but quick responses to this. This is something we've talked about, but it's really, really relevant to week 8. It becomes increasingly relevant to week 8. So, but it requires a certain amount of reflection. Paige is an old friend in the LA area, very active ModPo person who I've met several times over the years. We've talked a lot in the past few weeks about the unique learning community that ModPo is. I'm wondering about the teachers in the group. I know that ModPo has influenced my teaching style, especially in my online teaching. But for the TAs, how has being part of ModPo affected your teaching? Ooh. I want to start with Gabby, who's not a potted plant. And then I think I want to ask Lily to respond to that as well.
Okay.
Gabby?
Well, I have 3 brief responses. The first is the most immediate and maybe most boring answer, which is that I've like completely modeled the way I teach close reading off of not just ModPo, but off of Al's technique, which is both particular and forceful, but I think activates some really good lessons about why pieces of things speak to each other, why parts speak to wholes, and forces you to think about the architecture of a poem, even if you don't know that you're thinking about the architecture of a poem. So I think I've really learned how to teach close reading from here. The second is during the pandemic, when there was a very much immediate switch onto online, I felt much more equipped for it, and also much more equipped for all of the messy things that happen in such a transition onto online. And the fact that online is useful, it spreads out more, but also tends to fall apart a bit quicker. So those kind of adaptive skills have been incredibly helpful. And as I was getting into this new quarter, we were talking to our students, because I'm co-teaching, and we were saying, hey, look, we don't know if we're going to end up online again. This whole quarter is kind of up in the air. But part of the thing that I promised my co-teacher was I was like, I can handle it. If we fall apart and we have to go online, it's fine. I got this.
Yeah. Good skill.
So that's a useful skill. And I guess the last thing I would say is that I think ModPo's webcasts have a style of kind of no matter what happens, just keep going, in the sense of we often have technical difficulties, or maybe somebody says that question doesn't resonate with me and I don't have anything to say, or I feel that what Al does is very much let's see what sticks, and when something doesn't stick, it's very much we just immediately shift gears. And I realize that I'm talking a bit more about teaching skills rather than the kind of abstract concepts behind pedagogy. But I feel that there's something that I've learned from ModPo, which is always have a plan B through J, and switch quick. So that's my end.
Well, you are the opposite of a potted plant. I'm not surprisingly, I love everything you just said, but I just want to comment on one thing. Then we'll turn to Lily, and then I think we have a phone call. The wrestling that we've done in 10 years, the wrestling with the platform, it's never been quite right. With all due respect to a lot of people out there in Silicon Valley, young engineers who are trying to make Coursera work for millions, ModPo pushes that to the limit, and things break and things aren't right. And we do a lot of complaining about it behind the scenes to Coursera. We had a session with them just yesterday. But in the end, we're just dealing with it. We are adaptive. We have invented so many workarounds that ModPo is basically one giant workaround. Chris and Zach are great at it, and Lainey and Anna and we spent a lot of time just thinking, how can we crack this thing open and try something different? We use every different medium we can think of, and we have twice a year, we have spitballing sessions over beer and pizza, and we just, sometimes a nice French meal in Montreal, and we just make a huge list of things we might try that are different, So I love that part of it, and I do think that it is, I don't know if when Gabby mentioned this, that it raised it up to the level of a teaching philosophy, but I think it is. I think adaptive, open-hearted, and listening skills are totally about, when you go online, also listening to what's wrong with the online platforms that are mostly profit-making and driven by all the wrong reasons. We are here invading that space as best we can. Thanks, Gabby. And Lily, and then we're going to go to the phone. Lily, what have you learned?
I think the biggest two components are one, about how even, like in our face-to-face classes with our Penn students, like how amazing it is to see what students will write and submit before they come into the classroom thinking about a particular thing, like say a poem or a chapter from a text that we're reading, and then how, so we capture what they thought when they read it on their own, through that like Canvas post or paper they might submit, and then seeing what happens when they all come into the classroom together to close read something and talk about something. I feel like what I've learned from ModPo is like how important it is to have both of those experiences to really learn about the text, like thinking about it on your own and giving just as much primacy or importance to the part where we all come in and come together and close read it and talk about it. And how great it is to see students really making those new connections, even though they like thought they knew something about it, and then they had a communal experience where they really realized they didn't know everything there was to know about it. Is like, that's such a cool aspect of ModPo. The second thing is revisiting and like looking over and over again at the same text. And I feel like actually in my ESOL teaching, that's been more of a big thing. There's so much repetition necessary, and you're always sort of worried that the material is going to get boring or whatever, but you just see where to look at it for a second time, like let's say a story or a paragraph or something. If someone was really struggling to get it, the second time really helps. And if somebody like really understood it when we talked about it last week, then they help someone else understand it a different way this week. Like, that repetition of material doesn't mean that you're not going somewhere, or you're not like moving through the semester fast enough or something. It's like actively a good thing to keep coming back to the same text and the same poems or stories.
Thank you, Lily. Two great points. A quick note on your first point, and then we're going to go to the phone. In a speech became an essay called Notes Toward a Hypothetical Novel. It might be Notes on a Hypothetical Novel. James Baldwin talked about dreaming of, in that speech, he didn't tell you the novel that he was writing, and he never wrote a novel that actually worked this out, if I may. But he theorized this democracy of voices. He wanted to figure out whether the novel as a form could be given over to the voices. He was talking particularly about the people in Harlem whom he wanted to write about. He wanted every voice in there. And I think that you can easily see that as utopian and unrealizable. That's why I call it hypothetical. But I think that the best classroom aspires to a democracy of voices, something like what we have with tens of thousands of people in ModPo. The potential of the massive open online course, the MOOC, which for about 5 minutes was utopian, generally thought to be utopian. For us, I think it continues to be, but most MOOCs turned into sage on a stage, soundbite, talking heads. But what we've tried to do, as you guys have been talking about, is figure out whether the democracy of voices is something that a technology can enable. We know it can. It just hasn't gone that way in the course of things. But it's always had that potential. Not so much, well, anyway, yes, it's always had that potential. Chris Martin, with the mic in hand, this is so great that you get to do this. We used to have a TA monitor the phone, and now it's Chris Martin.
I know. I get to have all the fun of talking to all the callers. I really enjoy it. So
is that why we have all these technical glitches? You're too busy talking?
I'm too busy chatting, yeah.
Oh, man.
Zach is actually making up for a lot of the work I usually do, so covering me. But calling from Tennessee, we have Margaret on the line.
Margaret, the aforementioned Margaret,
yes.
I think. Hello, Margaret. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm back. That's me, Al. Hi.
How are you?
Well, for somebody with extreme social anxiety, this is terrifying. So, otherwise, I'm fine.
Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. How can we... It's a little too late for this because you called and you're on the air. But how can we make this easier for you?
don't ask me any questions. That's probably the best thing.
Ooh. Were you listening? Were you talking to Chris, or did you hear what Gabby said at the beginning?
I think I was talking to Chris.
Okay. Well, Gabby said first is referring to me as a kind of classroom figure in close readings. Like, I don't think he used the word aggressive, but
said particular and forceful.
Forceful, right, the forceful part. So, Margaret, you immediately have realized that I am a forceful person. And so maybe the answer to my question is, what can I do to make you feel better, is for me to shut up and just listen to you, and I'll be nice, I promise.
You don't have to be nice. Just don't ask me any questions. So here, I'm actually... This is like, okay, I had to, in order to be on the phone, I had to turn off my webcast, right? So this may sound like I'm looping back to 10 minutes ago in the webcast because I don't really know what you've done in the last few minutes. Okay, so I kind of lost that.
Totally okay.
So I'm kind of thinking about something that we were talking about on the YouTube chat a few minutes ago, which is the whole thing about being languaged. I may just be dense here, but how are you even going to communicate unless we're languaged? Because we have to agree on certain words, right? I mean, we have to agree on meanings of certain words in order even to speak. Mm-hmm. Although even that is not ever going to be adequate, because when I say anxiety, you may have a different picture of anxiety than what it is, for example, that I have, right? So even I love the idea that, you know, you're pushing back, the poets are pushing back against the discriminatory part, the cliched part, the kind of what we consider bad part of being language. Okay, I get that. Like the Linhoginian thing in my life. But at the same time, we rely on that. I mean, they rely on that. The poets rely on that, because otherwise, how would we be even hearing, seeing, reading what they're saying? And then someone brought up in YouTube chat, which maybe Miranda, can you think, I think she said you can, but you can think without language. You can think without language. And I'm trying to think, well, I guess you think in images, like Helen Keller before she had words. There's that stunning moment where she puts her hand in the water of the pump, and she suddenly, it clicks in her brain, which has never had words before, because she lost her hearing and her sight, I guess, before she really got language. She suddenly realizes that what her teacher is spelling into her hand, W-A-T-E-R, it's that stuff on my hand that's whatever it feels like. I just got lost.
No, that's fine.
But, I mean, you have to have, you kind of see where I'm heading with it.
I totally
how do you think without words? How do you think without language?
So what I'm going to do, Margaret, is I'm going to ask you to hang up and turn the YouTube back on, so you can hear us respond, to take you off, so that it'll prevent me from irresistibly asking you a follow-up question. But I know that I'm going to see you at an office hour again, and we can continue talking about this. And also, if you don't mind, I'm going to, at the end of our webcast today, I'm going to quote your open love letter to the ModPo team, so they'll know how you feel about them.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Margaret from Tennessee. I'll talk to you later. Okay, I'm going to ask Amber Rose, Kate, and Kanar to respond to any aspect of what Margaret is concerned about. We talked in our office hour, Margaret came, and we were talking about what is the state of being languaged. Is that a negative thing? Is that meant to be by Heginian, for instance, as a positive thing? Is it just an inevitable thing? What are the upsides and downsides? So, Amber Rose, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, there's a lot to respond to from what was shared. I Okay, there are two immediate thoughts that come to mind, and others will help to fill out a response. The first is that I immediately thought of this Dion Brand line, "No language is neutral," and I guess I'm thinking the question was about how do we think without language, but I actually do want to say something about language, which is that it always holds histories, and it holds more than what the singular meaning in which it's being used in that given context. And so every time that we're using language, we're like bringing forward all of these other histories of its use. But I think that feeling, there is something about feeling that precedes language. But I think that there's also something about, I want to say the way that language sharpens our like grasp on sense. But maybe part of that grasping, like part of the sense making is being able to communicate. Maybe there's something about sense that's further expanded in communication through language. But I do think that feeling precedes it. But there are a lot of pieces. My mind is kind of buzzing. I'm still thinking.
Thank you, Ambrose. Let's turn to Kate. I just want to remind us that Margaret began by thinking about Hoginian, realizing through this poem that her selfhood, her socialization was created, it's shaped by the language that she heard, which is why there's so much colloquial and historically specific phrasing and language. We were talking about that earlier today, peachy. She really uses that kind of language very effectively in that poem, My Life. And the ModPo people are dealing with this for the first time, Kate, are thinking, okay, so if we are socialized through language, what room do we have for an alternative way of thinking about the way we have been formed? So, Kate, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think if there were a motto for Language Poetry Week, there are many mottos, but one might be whose order is shut inside the structure of a sentence, which is Susan Howe from My Emily Dickinson. And I think, I don't know, I can't really speak to whether or not we can think without language. I kind of feel like I can't, or I couldn't. But what I think Hoginian is able to do is break apart the language and show the degree to which the temporal part of syntax, I think, determines who we are and how we think of ourselves and how we think in general. So by taking apart the arrow of time that's built into our language structures, she makes plain how much meaning that arrow of time imparts to what we say and how we think of ourselves, and how specious it is and how arbitrary.
How arbitrary and specious, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So I just think her project of sort of not atemporal, but counter-temporal autobiography that is scattershot in a lot of ways really illuminates the degree to which we think of ourselves and the sequential nature of our memories, the time-constrained nature of our memories, how large a part that is of who we are and how we think of ourselves and how we are able to think in general.
And how large a part of being socialized to agree with the existing social values, namely conservative values, that is to say, social values being designed, especially in America of the late 40s and 50s, which is when she grew up, being designed to get you to accept them without thinking about the linguistic basis of all of them. So you create, as she moves into the 60s, you create this counter language or counter narrative, as you described it also, a counter theorization of the arrow of time, of what things are supposed to be in what order. And you get to John Keane, who's featured in this week, in the main syllabus, writing counter narratives about the European existence in North America, for instance, and so many other examples in that great book. This is a language poetry project, and Lynn is great at doing exactly. So you can't, I'm with you, you can't counter language by preceding it or by imagining that it's not there. You have to come up with a counter language to do it, or a different form. Thank you. I want to go to Kanar on this. But before, Kanar, before you say what you're going to say, I just want to play a little bit of Lynn reading from one of the sections. It is, in fact, the section where the tagline is the one that Lainey Brown is about to ask you to contemplate. I don't know if we'll hear that line because I'm going to skip forward, but it'll set Lainey up very well. So here is Linhoginian in the middle of that in that little section.
A dog bark, the engine of a truck, an airplane hidden by the trees and rooftops. My mother's childhood seemed a kind of holy melodrama. She ate her pudding in a pattern, carving a rim around the circumference of the pudding, working her way inward toward the center, scooping with the spoon to see how far she could separate the pudding from the edge of the bowl before the center collapsed, spreading the pudding out again, lower, back to the edge of the bowl. You could tell that it was improvisational because at that point they closed their eyes. A pause, a rose, something on paper. Solitude was the essential companion. The branches of the redwood trees hung in a fog whose moisture they absorbed, lasting what might be its present a future.
Wow, it's nice to hear that and to remember how various and beautiful the language is at the level of the sentence. Kanar, quick thought on this whole question that Margaret raised?
Yeah, I try to make it quick. Yeah, there are just so many ways of being language, I think, and of being in language. I guess what I'm a little preoccupied just kind of thinking of my own relationship to kind of languaging and speech specifically, because I think it took me sort of decades of my life to become more comfortable with speaking. It was never something that came very naturally to me. And I think as I kind of improved my grip on actually written language and allowed myself to be a little attached to notes and to things being written down, I actually became much more capable as a speaker, and it helped me kind of inhabit different languaging, including that which occurs through speech. And so I guess I'm just thinking about that and sort of how that relationship has borne out through just like learning and reading and writing poetry, and how poetry, I think, too, has actually changed the way that I speak and maybe increased my own comfort with speech. Through my 20s and like now part of my 30s, I'm like, wow, poetry actually has really profoundly influenced, I think, my capacity to be comfortable in language and in sort of language that's not always the most determinant of things. So that's what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
I think Lynn has created in my life the portrait of a young person, the portrait of a writer, an emerging writer, in your case, writer, speaker, as a young person. And when you open your mouth finally with some confidence, Kanar, the words that come out are a combination of everything that was jammed in there from classrooms and parenting, and then twisted around in your own way of resisting it. And that stuff comes out in a kind of improvisational dance between the socialization of language and the resistance of language toward a poetics. And that's really cool to listen to. So Lainey is going to pose a question having to do with my life. It seems to be the star text today. But as I turn it over to Lainey, I just want to remind everybody that the number is 610-616-3208. We'd love to get one more caller before we get into final words. And you can Skype us at ModPo Pen, and Chris will answer either way, 610-616-3208. Lainey Brown, I can't wait for this one. Let's get going on it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Allie and Jason and Kate.
Well, I think Dave needs a turn
Dave.
too. Yep.
Allie, Jason,
I keep score.
Kate, and Dave.
And also, Gabby has to leave at 11, so maybe we can get Gabby in there real quick at the beginning of that.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So I'm going to read the line and then give you a minute to think about it, because I also want to say something really quick in response to this question. So here it is. The first poem that we have in our ModPo main syllabus from my life begins with, "What is the meaning hung from that depend?" So my question is, how is this short phrase anthemic to many of the works that we're reading this week and concepts that are driving language poetry? What is the meaning hung from that depend? And we can look at individual words or the whole phrase, or however you want to tackle it. And I just wanted to add about this question. I feel like that we're pointing to this really important paradox about language, because poetry is also a language, right? So in order for poets to write poetry, there's a stepping back from the medium or the material. So in other words, painters don't speak with paint. So there's this illusion that we use it all the time, but we're doing something different, creating a whole new language. Anyway, we could go on forever on that question. That's a really interesting question. This language. All right. So I'm going to turn to Gabby first. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. So the word depend comes from dependere, which means like hang down from. So when we say something depends on something else, we mean it's kind of hanging off of it. We mean it's relying on a support from something else. So there's a literal sense. What is the meaning hung from that depend, which is like, what are we talking about when we're talking about things hanging off of each other? But the other thing I want to say is that, like, I think of the new sentence not as a statement about the sentence itself, but actually about the work that the period does. I commented on this to, I want to say, Nicholas Stern in office hours, who had asked me, like, why are there no question marks? Why are there no exclamation marks? Why are we always at period? And I think the reason is that what this poem does is take the period as a unit that can have various kinds of transitional qualities, that like sentences coming after periods can depend on the ones before them in a variety of ways we might not expect, and kind of open the possibilities for things like, pun intended, dependent clauses, following sentences and associations. So I think it's really just about opening up the possibilities of that unit of punctuation.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm really interested in that question of punctuation and lack of question marks also. So thanks for pointing there. Allie.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about the sentence in context as well. And each sentence depending on the other sentences around it. Always, especially as someone who loves prose as much as poetry, but especially in this text. And so, even just like the first line, a dog bark, the engine of a truck, an airplane hidden by the trees, and rooftops, my mother's childhood seemed a kind of holy melodrama. Within the first sentence, you're getting the same like need for depending on the other clauses within it as you're getting it within the sentence and between the sentences. And I think one of the like fascinating, liberating almost, reading my life has always actually like kind of replicated something that feels more pre-verbal to me than like a lot of very like languaged, obviously, like texts. And I think that's because the way that she moves between sentences unlocks a different type of logic, almost more of like a dream logic than what we're used to seeing in like more like expository writing. I don't know if that like answers the question.
No, that's
but...
amazing. Okay, so I want to repeat 3 points that I heard you made, and one of them has to do with context, which is so important in this book in general. So every time we have a repeated phrase, for instance, a pause, a rose, something on paper, it falls in between different phrases or sentences, thereby colliding and creating a multiplicity of new meanings. The second thing you mentioned, there's something almost pre-verbal, which I think also really connects to this question we were just speaking about. Isn't it true that we can have a deep connectivity and understanding of other people with no language? Isn't that true? So what is that? Is that thinking without language? Question mark. The third thing is dream or associative logic with which the phrases move, and although it's very dense, somehow it also allows space for our own memories and associations to creep in, and that space seems very intentional in the composition. So thank you so much, Allie. Jason.
Yeah, I love everything Gabby and Allie said and everything that you just said. So I'm just kind of thinking about the phrase itself as I believe it's the first phrase in the book. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the first section, isn't it?
It's the first section that we have in our
I think
ModPo
it might be
syllabus, but not the first poem in the book.
Yeah, I think it's the 4th or 5th section,
Okay.
when she's 4 years old, or 5.
Right. Well, nevertheless, the phrase "what is the meaning hung from that depend," it forces you into a kind of Steinian mindset to try to move among the words, but it's to depend is to hang from. So what is the meaning hanging from that thing that is hanging? And I think that in a way it's asking for me that's a kind of meta moment in this poem where it's asking what meaning, it's asking a meta question. It's saying what meaning is generated or is generated from the way, say, grammatical structure, logical paragraph structure has everything depends on everything else. And I think that I was trying to read it this time without trying to extract meaning from it or to allow it to really be paratactic and to kind of go with the proposal it makes that we can have a sequence of sentences that do not depend upon the other, and which opens up a kind of I mean, it's not like the Grenier cards, which you could have in any order, because the sentences are put in order here, but they make, because it looks like prose, we want to still get meaning out of it. And I think that there's something about letting each sentence like burn brightly on its own before moving on to the next. And to see that as a kind of negotiation between the writer in the writer's present time of writing and reflection, and the content being their own childhood, because memory is fragmented, and the relationship between anyone in one's past and to one's present is also a complex kaleidoscope of
wow, that's great. Complex
change.
Kaleidoscope. Thank
Yeah.
you. Amazing. I feel like there's a mini essay. There's many really brilliant points that you're making here that I want to try to just say like 2 words for each to just kind of capture. So the first question is, what is meaning hung or meaning hanging? What is meaning when it's freed from conventions of grammar and syntax? Everything depends on everything else. Therefore, we have a living tissue of sentences that we cannot extract because that interconnectivity is so important. What happens when we don't try to extract meaning as if it were something we could pull out, but we just allow this parataxis? And appearances are deceiving. It looks like prose, but what is it, right? We have a really interesting hybrid form here that's revolutionizing memoir, the idea of autobiography, poetry, prose poetry, etc.
One of the many brilliant things about what Jason just said has to do with interdependence. If you think about the idea of something depending on something else, upon or from something else, you've got something higher and then like a mobile, right? But what Jason's talking about is a dependence that defies the gravity of that priority, that hierarchy. So interdependence, of course, is a key term.
Non-hierarchical.
Non-hierarchical, but also horizontal as well as vertical. Can you go? Let's go to Dave, and then the phone, and then and we should do final words just so we can keep moving.
Thank you, Jason. Dave.
I think my comment here is more of a big picture comment. When I read, what is the meaning hung from that depend, I focus on what is the meaning. And it makes me think of just conceptually what Linhoginian is trying to do. I reread her essay, The Rejection of Closure, again last night. And it really, I think, leverages the question Margaret was asking, which I think is a great question, which is essentially, if we take all these insights about how limited language is and how fraught with artificiality and limitations language is, where does that even leave us? And Linhoginian talks about this in that essay, Rejection of Closure. I think it's a great essay. But this essay that she wrote, make no mistake, this is a closed text. Like, the point is that, if we want to recreate the world in certain ways, then it's great to understand the limitations of language and everything that these language poets are pointing out to us and showing us. But that's not to say that all language has to, as we conventionally understand it, is no longer able to communicate. It is still useful. And I think ModPo in general is about making us sensitive and aware of all these things out there in the world that we just take for granted. So to go back to Margaret's question, I think we can get maybe too caught up in each movement in thinking this means everything that we're doing before is wrong. I think what we can do is take these philosophical approaches and insights on board as we still have to navigate the world using conventional ways, but knowing their limitations just helps us understand everything out there a little bit better.
Thank you so much. I love that beginning with what is meaning, what is the meaning, and then how it's endlessly complicates the question of what is the meaning, what is meaning. It gets more and more complicated just focusing on that simple phrase.
Thank you all. Thank you, Lainey. We've been talking about the tagline that Linhoginian uses in my life, what is the meaning hung from that depend. And I cannot wait for our video editor to segment that, because that'll go really nicely in ModPo Plus. We have someone on the phone, Chris, and then we're going to respond. We're going to ask a couple people to respond to what the phone caller asks us. Then we'll do some final words, and we're going to end today by my quoting Margaret from Tennessee, who has written a thread, Why We Need ModPo, Final Thoughts Before the Final Weeks. So, Chris Martin, who is on the phone?
The long-distance caller winner of the day, we have Jackie in Jerusalem on the line.
This is Jackie in Jerusalem. Jackie, can you hear me?
Yeah, Al, hi.
Hey there. So you were in Berlin, and now you're in Jerusalem.
Well, yeah, we left, to make it short, we left Amsterdam, we were traveling around, then we came back here with all our 100 COVID tests and papers and files and things, and we are having our whole issues leaving Gaza, closing up the company a bit, and I have missed 2 weeks, and I also got the proofs back from my book.
Oh, great.
And I am, oh, great, it's terrible, because
but you're so productive.
I've ever done it.
You're so busy and productive. It's great.
No,
Keep doing what you do.
I'm 2 weeks. I'm 2 weeks late, and I missed the whole program because it really was. I was so happy the whole time I was working on it.
Yeah.
I'm still in week 6, but I have just a few things that I wanted to say about what has been said before.
Okay.
Now I'm editing, and I'm thinking of every word and balancing now every line as if you guys were going to be judging it somehow.
Oh, no.
And I'm making changes that I might not have made because
good.
I keep saying theater and poetry, and in many of the plays there are little not rhyming things. There are small pieces of poetry that I tend to do.
So you're saying
all of a sudden
I'm sorry to interrupt.
conscious of.
I think you're saying that you've become, the ModPo has helped you once again become very language conscious.
Well, not language creative also, because you say, no, this word is not the right word. I'm going to go look very far for something else.
Right.
And so that is one thing that when you were talking before about teaching, I don't teach, but in a way I'm part of an NGO, so I do teach.
You do. You do that. Your work is very collaborative.
Get up to the language. I didn't yet get up to the language poems, but I was thinking as everybody was talking that there are situations that really don't have words. There are situations that happen where you look at them and either you keep saying the stunned silence when something happens, and there really are no words for it. So you are left with this internal impression and no way to get it out. So I think that all this language is difficult and expression is difficult, and saying these sometimes unsayable things that you only feel, and they can be beautiful and they can be terrible, I think it exists. I think it exists in something called feelings, and a person has to be either very talented or very particular to get those accurately out.
Yes.
That would be about language. And about what you said about ModPo, it's a little bit heartbreaking because the first thing that I thought is I said, well, he needs a night show. You need to be like the new David Letterman of something
David
that everybody
Letterman.
tunes in and has well, or whoever is next in line, because if Coursera isn't helping,
Jon
and
Stewart.
it's really the best MOOC I've participated in,
Oh.
and you have the most ways to be in touch with people, and the most ways to comment and to give feedback, and such a team that it is that it's true what you say. You can talk to them till they don't want what you want, and you want something bigger, and it looks like you need something bigger.
Wow, Jackie.
Those are
well,
my comments.
wow, Jackie, you are too much. You've encouraged us all. Maybe everybody will regret encouraging me to have a late night show. But
Do it.
I don't know. Chris and Zach are into it. What do you think, Chris and Zach? Can we go to the big time?
Yes.
Jackie, thank you so much. I hope Jerusalem and the whole thing with getting in and out of Gaza, I hope things work out for you and that your NGO is always successful. Thank you for being part of this community. Thanks for calling.
I love it, and I'm gonna keep going, even if I don't know when it ends, but I will do. I will
you,
keep
Jackie.
going. As my deadline is November 1st, so then I'm free again.
Wonderful. Well, we'll see
Love
you back.
you all.
Love you too, Jackie. Jackie Lubeck calling from Jerusalem. We're going to do final words. Thank you, everybody. We're going to do final words. We're going to go around, and then I'm going to read Margaret's love letter. So why don't we start with Kate, and Allie will be next.
Sure. I was just thinking, I'm still thinking about what is the meaning hung from that depend, and how the redundancy of it, of the hanging from recapitulates the name for and the idea of a language poet itself, and really evinces their whole their whole philosophy, where you can't get outside of language, but you can get into it. So that self-reflexivity keeps it recurs through the work and the references to it.
That is very cool. I've never asked Lynn this, but Linhoginian, but I think somewhere back there is so much depends, the Williams thing, which is such an important.
That actually came up in my office hours this week. Somebody asked that.
And what depends on that? Well, that poem is a vertical poem, right? So it is a mobile. It is a poem where you have dependent clauses. So much depends upon what? This thing in the garden, in the yard. And I think what Kate is saying is, and Jason said this as well, and so did you, Lainey. I think that Lynn it's a beautiful programmatic moment where she's basically saying, what's after modernism? Interdependence, not just the modernist dependence, which is very, hierarchical and, shall we say, top down. Yeah. Thank you, Kate. That was great. Thank you. We're going to go to Allie for a final thought, followed by Jason.
There's just been a lot of cheering on in the, there's so much happening in the YouTube, but Jason's sweater got a shout out. Lily's glasses got a shout out. A lot of people were just kind of cheering on Margaret for calling. It seems like there are a lot of really brilliant people in the YouTube chat who feel shy. And I would just encourage people to call. We want to talk to you.
Yeah.
I have office hours at 12, so you should please come.
That's 40 minutes from now. Hang out with Allie Castleman. Sounds great. Thank you, Allie. Good to see you. Jason's next, followed by Amber Rose.
Okay. I'm just thinking in general about the array of work we have to look at this week, and thinking about it's not that the language poets are saying because we are language, we are at a loss. But more that we need to be more language conscious, like
Right.
Al, that was your phrase.
Right.
And we need to be language conscious in the same way as one needs to be a good listener, because the formalities and kind of ingrained patterns of fixed language prevent us from truly expressing ourselves and being heard. And
Yeah.
language is, it's an incredibly tender and beautiful material that allows us to connect to one another, but it's also necessarily, which is the paradox, it's necessarily limited to a certain alphabet, to a certain number of phonemes. Like in order for language to do what it does, there are structural kind of weaknesses. Like it is good to be able to generalize about trees in general, but if trees in general if the word designates a set while negating our capacity to really think about what constitutes that set and the variousness within it, then we run into trouble. So what language poets are doing are kind of really pushing and pulling at language to refresh it and to I know that the language poets don't go around speaking in language poetry. They also have a normal way of they still abide by conventional conversational rules to some extent. But I think it's out of a love of language that they feel an urgency to air out its stagnancies,
Yeah.
so that greater expression and hearing, more supple way of that, so that language can become more interdependent on both speaker and hearer.
Yeah.
And both of those in conversation.
That's great, because it's been a theme for this whole webcast, and I think it's good to remind. We think of the language poets as critical, as critiquey. That was certainly their tone originally, but it's good to be reminded of how positive and constructive they intend to be. Amber Rose Johnson, followed by Dave.
So my final thought is me sharing that I was thinking about, I wanted to bring in Elizabeth Willis's survey. I was thinking about Linhoginian's My Life, and I was like, oh yeah. And then I went and I'm looking in the resources, and it's actually, survey is in week 2.
Week 2, yeah, ModPo Plus.
Yeah, but this is definitely one of those moments where you see how, poems can be categorized in all kinds of ways, and things are kind of circular in the syllabus. But I want to, in this moment, my final word is thinking about survey as another example of a language poem, and showing that kind of long memory of being languaged and accumulating language and making meaning out of like the kind of fragments. Yeah, so just a plug to go back to week 2 and look at another great poem that I think complements my life really well.
Yeah, love that poem. Love that poem. And the reason it ended up in week 2 is that the catalog-y quality of the end of that poem just struck me as Whitmanian, so I threw it in there. That's about it. Thank you, Amber Rose Johnson. Dave Poplar, followed by Kanar.
I'm just going to use this to plug my office hours tonight, which are at 11 p.m. Eastern time, and I'll do them on Zoom. That's all.
Zoom, yeah. You got a couple of takers last time you did Zoom. Thank you, Dave. Fantastic. Kanar, followed by Lily.
Sure, yeah. I think I'll just mention, we've kind of alluded to a lot going on in the YouTube chat, and it was indeed very lively today. And I think a lot of folks too are interested in potentially having a sort of more chat-like format of just kind of continuous typing sort of thing, rather than necessarily like in an office hour or something. I think some people aren't able to make office hours. So I would say, go to that thread and maybe continue that conversation there if, there's an interest in organizing some other way of communicating with one another, because I know a lot of good connections were made between people in that chat today. And my office hours are tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Chris and Zach and Lainey, hear this. Implicit in what Kanar just reported from the YouTube chat is we still need to find a chat. What we do, our office hours, when they're not on Zoom, Zoom is great, but some people are a little shy about Zoom. The threads are basically almost synchronous, asynchronous. It's kind of too much like email or something. So we need to find a chat. We need to find a live chat platform that we like and make that available. So thank you. Lily, followed by Lainey.
Just want to say, if you're a longtime ModPo person and looking for new exciting things in this week, definitely take to heart Amber Rose's recommendation to get into Erica Hunt this week. And there's a lot of new content even since last year for Erica Hunt, because she visited us as a Writers House Fellow, which means we have amazing audio and recordings, and like some of that is in ModPo Plus, and some of it you could find even more just by Googling Erica Hunt Kelly Writers House. So it should bring it up on our YouTube. Yeah, just a fun. I mean, anyone can investigate that, but I know the longtime ModPo people are always looking for something exciting and new in the syllabus.
Hey, Lily, we have a poet coming as a Writers House Fellow in the spring of 22, whose appearance at the Writers House will generate ModPo material, no doubt. And who is that?
It's true. On March 28th and 29th, Carolyn Bergvall will be our poet fellow this year. So I'm really excited for that, and excited to, knock on wood, be hosting everybody in person.
Yes, including Caroline coming from Europe. We're very excited about that. Lainey Brown, final thoughts.
Yes. I wanted to strongly recommend that everybody take a listen to the new poem talk on Leslie Scalapino that's in ModPo Plus this week. Kanar is on that, and it's brilliant. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful poem by Leslie, and hopefully we'll be adding more Leslie. I also wanted to ballyhoo my office hours and give a shout out to regulars, Sally, Hannah, Sylvia, Denny, Rihan. We're on Zoom and we're having a really good time. So I want to invite all shy and non-shy people to come to the Zoom. You could even leave your camera off and just chat if you really want to, but probably then you'd be tempted to turn it on. I'm a shy person, and I'm going to be there. So
yeah, I'm a shy person. I'm going to be there.
Join us.
Oh, you have a different crew. I like your crew. My crew, it's 8 in.the morning, so I get Europeans and mostly Asians, people in East Asia, Anand from Mumbai, Australians, somebody from Indonesia. So much fun. Yeah, but it's a different crew. I love this. Okay, my final thought is simply to read to you what Margaret has written, Margaret from Tennessee, who called us. I want to thank Chris and Zach for helping us with the tech, for doing the tech, for being totally responsible for the tech, and all the wonderful TAs and Lainey. Margaret calling from Tennessee, the same Margaret, and Jackie from Jerusalem. We're going to close out with this post that's called Why I/We Need ModPo Final Thoughts Before the Final Weeks. And it is week 8, and we're getting to week 9 and week 10. It's also subtitled, Or an Open Love Letter to the ModPo Team. It reads this way. I love Pennsylvania. It's Mr. Rogers' real neighborhood. It's Philadelphia, where my mother and I got off a train from wherever we lived in Princeton, while my father one year was doing a professor thing to buy my first recital dress, a froth of pale lime sherbet. I can tell what year that was. That still hangs in the closet of my mind. It's the midway state in the endless bus trip to school from home in Tennessee, where the homesick Virginia many hours turned into anticipation of New England life. It's ModPo. 10 weeks, those of us who live somewhere else can feel like we live in the Kelly Writer's house, listening, absorbing, and talking with all the personalities who keep the air there crackling with images and ideas and always words, where we shut the door on the rest of our lives so we can meet and linger with others from around the world who also get to step out of the deep loneliness of the rest of the year to talk about poetry and how and why poetry means and why poetry is meaningful. Or maybe we leave the door open and with Rahana and Miranda bring our children along for a poem or two. I've done that. I've also turned the key and left the clutter of what I'm supposed to be doing outside, then stepped dazed back into that world, Ashbury, Ashbury's you and I are meeting away from, that rest of the world that most of the time sweeps us along in its necessities. It's where we remember that we're like James Schuyler at his February window looking out at the vibrancy of life, like Ashbury looking out of his window at Guadalajara, looking out from whatever they're stuck into what they don't have, whatever they're stuck into what they don't have, but through the work of their imagination can spring color, a bandstand with music. And we too, stuck in our own frame, remember we can also look out, dream, imagine with the poetry, because of the poetry, because the poets did their work, but above all because the ModPo team does their work of giving us the poets doing theirs, opening the frames of our lives for just a while to allow in the insights of countless others to connect with ours while we cheer each other on and imagine our way into something more than is here, something that includes the its of Schuyler's tulip dust, the its of Guest's yellow-capped castanets, the its of connecting, relating, living more than the whatever that usually contains us. Thank you, Team ModPo. It's you. Thank you all. Thank you, Margaret, for expressing that so well. Thank you, guys. And we have so much more to do, but we'll be all together a week from today for week 9. And then after that, I think Erica Kaufman is coming on November 10th. It's going to be Erica Kaufman Day. So much to look forward to. Thank you all. Have a great day. See you in the forums. See you in office hours. Bye.